was reading a story of a woman who was raised in a home that was a strong Christian home, really good, one of my favorite pastors in the country. And she just, at a young age, was overwhelmed with anxiety, even as a little child. So when you're raised in a pastor's home and you have anxiety, it's a bad thing. Because anytime she said when she would be vulnerable about how she felt worried or scared or anxious, she said she was immediately met by well-meaning Christians who would start quoting Bible verses to her. You know, they would quote what Jesus said about not worrying about tomorrow, because tomorrow has enough for today. Just worry about today, or it's okay. Or other passages from the Bible about, don't be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, present your requests to God with thanksgiving. And she said, for people who live with a high amount of anxiety, it just doesn't work that way. Quoting a Bible verse, she said she knew that these people meant well, but here's the sentence that really caught my attention. She said, their words often did lasting damage to me. Christians, we have to understand this. I know that we mean well, but people who live with an anxiety dial spun down really low, who are just going to hand out Bible verses to other people who are anxious, I want you to hear those words from her again. She's a serious Christian, and she said, the words did lasting damage to me. Understand that's not how this works. And the problem is huge in America today when 48% of millennials and 48% of Gen Z feel anxious most or all of the time. And when you have 40 million Americans suffering from anxiety disorders, this is a huge problem. So we can't approach it with just simplistic answers and just quoting Bible verses to people. So we've been saying that anxiety is our body's natural response to perceived danger. So let's say that you're here late tonight. Well, it doesn't have to be that late, 6 o'clock. It'd be pitch black, right? So or let's say you're at a store and it's you come out late and you've parked far away from the entrance, and so you're walking out to your car. It's pitch black. There's only one light. It's way over here. And as you approach your car, there's no other cars around, no other people around, but there's this line of like bushes right by your car. And as you approach your car, all of a sudden this big guy steps out from between the bushes. He's wearing all black trench coat, black hoodie, and he starts walking fast towards you. And you're all alone in this dark environment, and he's coming up on you. Now, your anxiety is going to be triggered, right? You're going to start to feel a little anxious. And your system is telling you you're in danger. Now, let's say he reaches in his pocket and he pulls something out. Now, all of a sudden, oh my goodness, he's pulling a knife, he's pulling a gun, he pulls out a donut. And he just eats his donut and says, hey, have a good night, and he walks past you, right? You weren't really in danger, but your alarm system is wired to tell you that you are in danger even when you're not. And that's part of the challenge of anxiety. It actually can serve a positive purpose for us. It's activating all those chemicals inside of us so that we're ready to fight or run, but many times it's activating for no reason at all. In that case, there's nothing going on. We said, think of it like a car alarm. Car alarms can serve really valuable purposes unless they become so sensitive that they're telling you that you're in danger when nothing's going wrong. And that's what happens for a lot of people. They live with the dials spun up a lot in their life. We've talked about the fact that there are two ways that our dial gets activated. First, there are situational moments where your anxiety spins up. Like I said, if I asked some of you to come up right now, take my microphone and say a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what you love about God, worst moment of your life, share a few things like that, right? Your anxiety dial would get spun up. Some of you would be like, you're not coming. Public speaking is a huge trigger. So is confronting someone. Some of you do not do this. You do not give constructive feedback. You do not talk about things that are wrong in your relationships because you're so afraid. Even the idea of it triggers anxiety for you. And for some of you, if you look down right now and saw a spider scampering across the floor, we would all see a big reaction from you. Because even looking at the picture makes some of you feel anxious, right? The dial gets spun up, and that's what we call situational anxiety. Some of you are like, thank you for getting off that slide. It's like, oh, right? So it's situational. Your anxiety isn't there until you are in a moment where, and it just triggers, right? You're not really in danger from the little spider, but it's your body's telling you you're in real danger. You might die. No, you won't die. But for some people, and here's what we have to understand, their dial never moves. Their dial is always at a 3, whether nothing is going on at all. That's what that young girl was talking about. Some people, their dial is always at a 6 and it never changes. It's always up. It's not situational. There's something under the biology, in the biology of the person and the chemicals that are going on inside of them. And so that's why simplistic answers for these people are really, really difficult. And so what we want to do is, again, we want to just understand that there is really, really good news for people who are suffering from anxiety. Really good news. All the research, all the people who do this professionally have so many examples of how anxiety is treatable. You can learn how to handle the anxiety that you have in your life. That's the good news. There's real hope for anxiety sufferers. We know this. I am not a professional when it comes to this. So that's why everything in this series so far has come from a man named Dr. Henry Cloud. He's a Christian psychologist. He talks and writes about this extensively. He has decades of experience in treating it. He's the one who, if you hear anything good in this series, just know it came from him. And so we're going to continue this series called Anxious for Nothing by talking about what do you do when anxiety triggers a desire to control. So this will be fun. Please open your program. Take out the notes you'll find inside. Grab a pen, something to write with as we talk about this today. Super important subject. And I promise that you've met people like this. So you may not, when you first see that sentence, really relate to it. But by the end of this first section, I think you'll be able to understand what we're talking about. So, and of course, welcome to those who are watching online. Glad you're watching. If you go to our website at Penn Church Life, you can get these notes as well. So let's go right into it. 2 things. So the first thing I want you to understand is what this trigger is really about. And the trigger is this. It's the threat of not being able to control what affects us. That's what the trigger is. That's what makes some people, their dial just spin way up. And they turn to controlling behavior. So let me explain this. If you have Spotify, I don't know how many have Spotify. I got Spotify on my phone in my car. I love it. You can look up Dr. Henry Cloud. He has a call-in radio program. And he did an episode recently where he talked only about anxiety. It was amazing. There was a woman who called in. I was listening. Her name is Darlene from Florida. She's 54 years old. And she was in the middle of such severe panic attacks, she could barely drive. And so Dr. Cloud started talking to her. Well, tell me what's going on. And she said, I've always been a little anxious, but now all of a sudden in a short period of time, my brother died. A couple of my friends died. Both of my in-laws died, and a family member was in a serious accident in a short time period. So that's just an enormous amount of pain and loss, right? For anyone to go through. And so she's really suffering and she's really struggling. And then so he just gets her talking, and she said this. She said when she was younger, she really struggled with anxiety. She went to a counselor for a while and it really helped. And now 20 years later, she was dealing with it again. She said the thing about me, she said, I grew up in a crazy dysfunctional family. And then she said something that the moment I heard it, I'm like, oh my goodness, I got to share this because this is what we're talking about. She said, I feel if I can't control things, then bad things are going to happen. That's how an anxious, controlling person feels. Does that make sense? If I can't control things, then bad things are going to happen. So therefore, I have to control them. And it's rooted, like she said, in the dysfunctional pain from her childhood. So Dr. Cloud, and one of the key things he talks about, he says, I want you to put this down on your notes. Anxiety then, for these people, it just thrives, it grows when there's uncertainty. The more uncertainty that there is in life, the more this anxiety grows, and the more some people turn to controlling behavior in order to try and get that fear under control. So Dr. Cloud said to think about it this way. What kind of home were you raised in? Were you raised in a home where there was a lot of chaos? Dysfunctional? Were you raised in a home where there was a lot of anger? Someone have a really bad temper in your home? Were you raised in a home where there was violence? Where there was abuse? Where there was alcoholism, addiction, instability? Were you raised in a home where someone was super controlling? So if you experience any of these things, then let me give you an example. In my family tree, I told the story before about my great-great-grandpa. So it'd be my mom's grandpa. He was a horrifying human being. He was a violent alcoholic, and you never knew what he would do. One night, in my family lore, one of the stories that I've been told for a long, long time is the story of what this man did when he went out on Christmas Eve to get drunk. And he came home on Christmas Eve completely drunk. He walked into the living room, and there were presents under the tree, and he walked over and he scooped them all up, and he walked outside. The next morning, the kids woke up for Christmas, and all the presents were gone. And he just thought it was hilarious. Months later, they were in the barn. The kids were playing in the haymow, and they found the presents in the haymow. Isn't that funny? That's hilarious. But he just thought it was a stitch. So can you imagine? Matter of fact, my mom tells a story still to this day of playing the piano one time when he walked in the house, and he walked over and he picked her up and he said, if you ever are playing the piano when I walk into this house again, I'll kill you. So what does that do to your anxiety dial? To be in an environment like that. And again, most of you were never in an environment that terrifying. But there are things on that list that you have lived through. And so what happens, of course, is that when you're in an environment like that, you have to be alert all the time. If you walk in and he's drunk, you don't know what he's going to do. You have to be on high alert. And by the way, your anxiety saved you as a child. For some of you, in the environments that you were raised in, your anxiety dial saved you. Because you couldn't just walk in and, hey, I'm home. You had to read the room and watch what was going on, and it absolutely was essential for your survival. The problem is, if you were raised in an environment like that, or you were in a marriage like that, or in a long-term relationship like that, then your dial got reset. And so you see danger when there isn't necessarily danger around you. And then, like the woman said, I feel if I can't control things, then bad things are going to happen. I've got to make sure everything's going the way it needs to go, because bad things are going to happen. Dr. Cloud talks about this. He said this. He said, controlling behaviors often stem from anxiety and fear, and when things feel out of control, it's natural to want to control them in order to feel safe. But of course, we can't control other people, and we can't control situations, so our efforts don't ultimately make us feel better. Isn't that true? You know how many controlling people I've been around in my life? I mean, I started making a list and I just quit. In my lifetime, I've been around a lot of controlling people. And I can tell you what behaviors emerge when the dial gets spun up and they become more and more controlling. Obviously, you know it. Criticism, nagging, complaining. This is an attempt to control everyone around them through all of these behaviors. But you know what never emerges in the life of a controlling person? And this is incredibly sad, and that's joy. I have never seen a joyful, controlling person. Because when the dial gets spun up, and the anxiety really gets strong, then joy is lost. This is not how God wants us to live in this broken world. So if this is the threat, and this is what triggers it, then what's the solution? Well, the solution is to learn how to challenge your anxious thoughts. And by the way, I'm going to tell you this, but the truth is, some of you who are really struggling with anxiety, you're going to need a counselor to help you walk through this. So I'm not trying to just say, here you go, here's the problem. If you live with your dial spun up a lot, you're not going to be able to listen to me talk about this one time and walk out and just apply it. But it is, I hope you'll see how valuable this content is as we get into it. So let's talk about what this means. There's 3 things under this. The first thing is you have to embrace the feeling of anxiety, which to some of you sounds crazy. Embrace the feeling of anxiety. So let me explain what this means. It means a couple of things. At first, it means that you pause when you're feeling anxious, and you name the emotion and the trigger, and that's why it says this on your notes. I'm feeling anxious because, and I filled nothing in on the blank because I can't do that for you. You have to do that. Now, some of you, this is so silly. You look at this and you go, Brian, duh, why would you ever have to say this? Well, because there are people like me who do not pay attention to their feelings. and do not pay attention to when they're feeling anxious, and they just try to ignore or suppress their emotions, and this is toxic to you. Some of you, you're like me. You don't know when you're feeling anxious because you just plow ahead, you just move forward, you don't stop, and the anxiety is building inside of you, and you're not paying attention to it. That's who I'm saying it for. But the reality is that acknowledging that feeling takes some of the power out of the anxiety. And if you don't acknowledge it, then you can open yourself up to let yourself being controlled by the anxiety without even being aware of that. Here's what I mean. I talk a lot in this series about what happened with the nation of Israel when God brought them out of slavery and brought them to the promised land. Because in the Bible, if you want to study anxious people, you go look at people who were formerly slaves. I mean, I can't imagine a more anxious, anxiety-filled lifestyle than being a slave, especially in the ancient world where you were property and they could do anything they wanted with you. So if you were a slave, like the nation of Israel was slaves in Egypt under the Pharaoh and the Egyptians. And so if they wanted to beat you, they beat you. If they didn't like the way you looked at them, they could just abuse you in any way they wanted, including kill you. So if you're raised in an environment like that, where there's all this uncertainty, remember what happens? Then the uncertainty and the anxiety, they go to hand in hand. And so all of a sudden you are so full of anxiety and so full of fear. And so God brings this entire nation of Israel out, and you got a nation traveling across a desert, and God is trying to help them turn the dial down. And by the way, he does things in that environment that he never does again in the Bible, because I love this. I think this is the heart of God, is that he cares deeply about people's anxiety. He cares deeply about anxious people. And so he was showing incredible mercy and compassion to these people. And so how do you feed a nation? They don't have any food. They're in the middle of a desert. What are they going to eat? Scorpions and rocks? They got nothing. So God does a miracle every day. Some of you know what the miracle is. Every day they come out of their tents in the morning and there's food all over the ground. It's called manna. We have no idea what it was. I tend to think it was white chocolate because it was white, that's what it was, and it melted away during the day. It's like, that seems to fit. It's like, that sounds good to me. It's like, whatever it was, it sustained them. Every morning they went out and they had food all over the ground, and they had one rule. One rule. Some of you know what the one rule was. God's like, I'll feed you every day, but here's my one rule. And Moses told them, do not keep any of it until the next morning. That's my one rule. You got one rule. Enjoy. I'll feed you every day. But why? Think about what he's doing with anxious people. He's trying to say, listen, you can trust me for your daily bread every day. Every day, I'll take care of you. If you will let me, every day I will take care of you. Just this one thing. Don't try and store up more for tomorrow. So what do anxious people do? Do they trust that there will be food tomorrow? Some of them didn't listen. They kept some until morning, and by then it was full of maggots, had a terrible smell, and Moses was very angry with them. So think about the thoughts in their mind. What if God doesn't help us tomorrow? We're going to be on our own. I better do something, right? I better take control. I better fix this myself. I better gather more than I need. Because what if God disappears? I mean, he could disappear. Or what if he doesn't provide tomorrow? And I have to be in control. So even if that means disobeying God, I'm going to do that because I'm so scared. Here's what I want you to know. Our desire to control things, listen, often spoils the work that God wants to do in our lives. Did you know that? It often spoils the work that God wants to do in our lives. And the reason it does is because it pulls us away from trusting in God alone. Because who are you going to trust in when you're anxious? Me! You're going to trust in you, not God. So I need you to think about this today. Are you feeling anxious? Is there anything in your life that's got you feeling anxious today? Really own this. I'm anxious because, and think about it. Then the second thing you do is this. Now you got to hit the pause button on the what ifs. Hit the pause button on the what ifs. So my wife and I have very different perspectives on this. My wife can do the what ifs really well. Really well. Matter of fact, there was a country western song a few years ago by Kane Brown, and it was called What If. Does any of you know this song? So my wife and I, when it first came out, I laughed because I thought it was hilarious. So it's a woman and a man singing. Somebody told me it's actually Kane and his wife singing it this way. It's like, it could have been me and my wife. So the woman in the story, in the first part, goes, she's just full of all these what ifs that are making her so anxious. She says, what if I hurt you? What if I leave you? What if I find somebody else and I don't need you? What if this goes south? What if I mess up? What if it break your heart in two? Then what? And it's a whole back and forth between the man and the woman. And she's going, what if, what if, what if, what if, oh, what if? And her anxiety grows, and I can't move forward in this relationship because I'm so anxious. And he's like, well, what if I was made for you and you were made for me? What if this is it? What if it's meant to be? What if I ain't the one of them fools just playing some game? What if I pull you close? What if I lean in? What if the stars line up and this is our last first kiss? What if? Totally different perspective. Still, the song makes me laugh to this day. Because it's like, this is kind of our relationship. It's like, and the what ifs can, I used to teach this differently. I used to think, and this is, I'm low anxiety. My dial doesn't come up very often that I pay attention to. So maybe it's higher and I'm not always paying attention to it. But I do the positive what ifs all the time. So something comes up and I have that, my brain is just wired that way. And then her brain is wired to go, but what about the negatives? And I used to say, what you need to do is sit down and think about all the potential negatives and think about how irrational they are. Yeah, that's for people like me. What the field of neuroscience is showing us is that if you do the what ifs, it makes your anxiety grow, it embeds it deeper into you. It makes it all worse. It makes it all worse. So what do? Because the what ifs come naturally. Some of you know exactly what I'm talking about because you what if better than anybody. Something comes up and you immediately go, what if? Okay? So here's what you do. You acknowledge the feeling. That's what we said in first point. The second thing is, and I love this sentence, Dr. Cloud said, treat it like a barking dog in the background. You ever have to have a conversation with a barking dog going on behind you? So you're standing there and you're talking to him, and there's a dog barking in the background. Okay? So you can hear the dog, but you're trying to have a conversation right now. So you just kind of keep going while the dog is barking in the background. That's what he said to think of it as. Some of you are like, turn that off. So it's like drives you crazy, right? That's what he said. It's like you will not turn down the volume on the anxiety by looking at the dog and getting mad at the dog, right? What will you do? You'll get worse. He said, treat it like a barking dog in the background. Because anxiety feeds off your attention, and that's what the what ifs do. So I used to teach this wrong. So I'm gonna acknowledge I'm feeling anxious. I'm gonna pay attention to the trigger, but I'm not gonna spend any time thinking about all the potential what ifs. It's only gonna feed the anxiety inside of me. Matter of fact, you can see this again in the story of the Exodus of Israel. So the nation of Israel is in slavery in Egypt, and many of you know who God chose to go back and set them free, right? He chose Moses. Moses was his guy. Very unlikely source or selection. And Moses knew it. So Moses, if you know the story, he's out tending sheep one day and he looks up on the hill and on the mountain and he sees this bush that's on fire. So this is God. This is what God can do. You've never seen this. I've never seen this. But God can make something light on fire and have the light and the heat and not burn up. God can do that. You and I can't do that. But he can do that. So the bush is on fire, and Moses comes up, and he gets up close to it, and God says, take your sandals off, this is a holy place. And God speaks to Moses through the bush in this holy fire moment. And he's on his knees, and he says, good news, Moses. I got a task for you. I got an adventure for you. You're going to go back to Egypt, back to Pharaoh, the most powerful man on the planet, and you're going to say, hey, all those slaves, let them go. That's what you're going to do. And immediately, Moses' anxiety dial spins to 11. he starts saying things like this to God. The first thing he says is, but who am I to go to Pharaoh and say this? Who am I to lead the people of Egypt? And God's only answer is, he doesn't say anything about Moses. He says everything about himself. He says, listen, I will be with you. That's all you need to focus on. And what does Moses do as God explains it to him? Moses protested again. Look at this. What if they won't believe me or listen to me? What if they say, the Lord never appeared to you? And he starts what-ifing God. He starts what-ifing God. What if? What if? What if? And as he literally, can you imagine doing that? You're in the presence of God. He's speaking to you from a bush on fire, and he literally gives Moses the ability to do miracles right there on the spot. He can throw a staff down and it becomes a snake, and he can pick it up. I know that would not make me feel less anxious with snakes. That would make me feel more anxious, right? But it's just these incredible miracles he gives him the power to do. And despite this, because all Moses focuses on is the what ifs. What if it goes bad? What if they won't listen? What if Pharaoh kills me? What if all these what ifs? His anxiety dial goes to 10. And look what he literally says to God. Moses again pleaded, Lord, please send anyone else. My cousin Joey, send him. My friend Felipe, I don't care who you send, but anyone else. That's what anxiety does. And if you do the what ifs, like Moses did, it spins the dial up. It spins the dial up. And it costs you again. So some of you are sitting here going, Brian, the what ifs are natural. I don't have to spend any time thinking about what if. They just pop into my mind. And they just start coming and coming and coming. I don't have to think about them. How do I handle this? Because it feels really natural to me. Well, here's what you do instead. You ask this question. What proactive step can I take in this situation where I'm feeling anxious? What proactive step can I take? Because that's what God wanted Moses to do. Get up and start on your way back. That's all you got to worry about. What proactive step can I take? Dr. Cloud tells a story about working with some of the most anxious people in America, and they are Wall Street personnel. You invest millions and millions and millions of dollars into companies that you really don't know what the CEO is going to do, what the economy is going to do, and they can make millions and lose millions. He said these were people of incredible anxiety because at any moment the stock market could tank and you have no control, right? So they were unbelievably anxious people. So he said every day to help them with their anxiety, he had them sit down and start every single day with this one task. Make a list every day. What do I have control over? What do I have control over? Every day he made these anxious people start this, and it helped so much. Because as they sat there and thought about their day, they could think about what if all day long. Instead, they started thinking, well, I can call this number of clients. I can handle this number of accounts. I can make this number of transactions. I can do, here's what I do have control over. He said what they observed was this, and I want you to understand, I want you to write it on your notes. When powerlessness goes down, anxiety goes down. When powerlessness goes down, anxiety goes down. What do you have control over? What proactive step can you take? Well, that sounds great, Brian. But what about all the things in life that we face that we have no power over? You get a medical news from the doctor that is terrifying. Can't do anything about that. Putin decides that he wants World War III. What are you going to do about that? We've had recessions and depressions in America. What are you going to do about that? What about things that we have absolutely no control over? What do we do in those situations? The key is this. And on your notes, I want you to write this down, but I've given you different words here because I really struggled with the wording on this. This is my wording, and I didn't know if it would resonate with you, but this is what resonates with me. I run to the God who's in control of everything. But I thought, for some of you, this might resonate a little better. I rely on the God, or I submit to the God, or I turn to the God, or I cling to the God. At different points in my life, I've used different variations of this word, and I just couldn't decide, so I decided to give you them all. I've never done that to my knowledge, but if one of those resonates better with you, then write that one down. I run to the God who's in control of everything. But don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I am not saying I run to the God. I am saying I run to the God who's in control of everything, not I run to the God who controls everything. He's not controlling everything. You think it would be this messed up? He's not controlling everything. He gave human beings something called free will so that we could make decisions to either act in loving ways or not act in loving ways. What are we doing? I mean, we make stunningly selfish decisions all the time. We want what we want, and we bring so much pain and damage into this world. So I'm not saying he controls every decision that's happening in this world. That's not what's happening. But what I am saying is, despite any decision I make or any other human being in this world makes, we always can go to the God who has the power beyond what we're seeing to take control. That's what I'm saying. And that's where, the psalmist went to. Look at this psalm from 121. He said, my help comes from the Lord, the God who made heaven and earth. So he made this, and he made this, and he wasn't tired, and he wasn't stressed. So there's nothing I will ever encounter that's beyond the control of my God. Nothing. He's always in control. And incredibly, this God has made promises like this. And I didn't give you these, so if you want to write them down, you can, but I talk about him all the time. He's promised, that's what his first promise to Moses was, no matter what comes your way, I'll be with you. I'll be with you. You stand in front of Pharaoh, I'll be with you. First thing he wants us to learn is that the relationship with him is of top priority, so that, listen, I know whatever I go through, may not like what I go through, but I'll go through it with God because he can't break this promise. He will be with me no matter what I go through. And he'll provide for all of my needs. That's his promise. Repeated in the Bible. All your needs. And he promised to bring good from anything. One of my favorite promises in the Bible. God can bring good from anything we experience in this world. And he's promised that he's always working on your behalf. He loves you. He's for you, not against you. So let's say that, hypothetically, one of the things that people are afraid of that you have no control over is layoffs. And every month it seems like there are all these companies announcing new layoffs. Well, actually, every month there are companies announcing layoffs. I heard earlier this year that in America about 200,000 people a month will experience this. Don't quote me, that was a long time ago. I looked it up because some of you know in January that's what happened to me. So I used to know the stat, I don't know the stat anymore. I'll never forget the day, and I know I've talked about it before, it fits so well with anxiety. Like I said, my dial doesn't go up very high, very often. But getting told that you just got laid off spun my dial all the way up. And then I came home and had to tell my wife that I got laid off. And that together was not a good first day. Because two people with their dial up, that's rough. So there was a lot of what-ifing, right? Okay, so what do you do when you face situations that are beyond your ability to control and you're feeling anxious? You know you're going to acknowledge the anxiety. Hey, I'm anxious because I don't have a job. And oh, by the way, I carried the health insurance. That's a problem in America, so I don't have this. Okay. So I'm not going to what if it. What if nobody wants me? What if? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say, what proactive steps can I take, right? That's the thing. What proactive steps could I take? And there was a lot that was in my control back in January when I got laid off. Like, I controlled how much I updated my resume. If I opened up my Word document over here, you'd probably see 50 different resumes. Because I read and read and read and read everything I could about how to create a resume that will get by the AI computers that try and block your resume from getting through. So I was constantly tweaking it. Constantly making adjustments based on what I was reading. I controlled that. I control updating my LinkedIn profile. If you don't use LinkedIn in this world, you're missing out on opportunities. And I didn't know what I was doing, so I read and I attended webinars and I learned everything I could about how to do that well. It's a different world, so I had to learn it. I improved my interview skills constantly. I watched over and over again. There are a couple of people that are really known for this. I watched all their videos. I learned how to answer the question of what are your greatest strengths and what are your greatest weaknesses and why should we hire you? What value would you bring to our company? And I used to know the answers to all of those things cold so that I could just talk. And I worked super hard on it. And I controlled how many jobs I applied for. And I was picky. I was careful. And I applied and applied and applied and applied. I probably easily applied for over 100 jobs. January, February, March of this year. But there's a little problem. What was out of my control? Anyone deciding to hire me, right? Kind of the biggest point. So my anxiety did go down when I was focused on what I can control, but I still couldn't control that. And I can't tell you how hard it was, because of all the jobs I applied to, at least 50% of them would within 24 hours say, no thank you, not you, not you, not you, not you. And you get that message every single day, day after day after day after day, and all of a sudden the what ifs start growing, right? The what ifs start getting really big in your mind. You're like, man, what if? What if? What if it's me? What if nobody likes me? What if nobody thinks I can do the job? And so I had to add to that step. What one proactive step can I take to rely on God? I want you to write that down. I did not create a space for it, but it was the key thing for me. What one proactive step can I take to rely on God? Because that's where our help comes from. And I took 3. And I would love to tell you that I did all this strategically and intentionally. I didn't. I kind of stumbled on all of it. But it was the key for me. I found a verse in the Bible that God had promised to help me with, and I memorized this verse, and I quoted it to him every time I was anxious. Do you know that God has promised in the Bible that I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go? I will counsel you with my loving eye on you. So did I need to know which way I should go? 100%. Thankfully, he made a promise that he was going to counsel me with his loving eye on me. Every time the anxiety would get really high and the what-ifs would get loud in my voice, I'd go back to God and say, you made a promise. You said you would guide me and you would counsel me with your loving eye. I can't wait to see what you're doing. And I wrote a little prayer out, and it's still on my laptop. If you walk up after the service and look at my laptop, for those of you here, sorry, for those of you online, you're not going to get to do that, but I still have the sticky note on my laptop, and it was my constant prayer to God. God, thank you for this opportunity to rely on you. I don't have this. So my shepherd will have to guide and provide. Thank you that you are already working. And I prayed that prayer constantly to God. And then I had a faith thought that came from a biography that I've talked about 100 times this year by George Mueller. We give it away here. He said in his book, work as if everything depended on your diligence. Now that sentence I like. I can work hard, work all the time, no problem. I pretended like finding a job was my full-time job, and I worked all the time at it. That sentence I like. And then I read this. And trust the blessing of the Lord to bring success. The blessing of the Lord, however, should not be merely sought. It should also be expected. And the word expected just hit me so hard spiritually. How many of you, when you're in a situation of uncertainty, expect to see God bless you? Some of you, you're in that moment right now. You are facing uncertainty, and you are praying, maybe even have a Bible promise. But how many of you actually expect God to bless you in the middle of this? My honest answer to you was, I had zero expectation of blessing. Matter of fact, the first time I read the quote, it stunned me so much that I actually didn't know if I believed it. And I had to wrestle with whether or not I expected God to bless me. And here's what I used to think. I used to think that the only kind of faith that God will respond to is this confident faith that stands up and it's like, my dial's always at zero. And that is not what I learned this year. You don't have to have your dial at zero to see God. Your dial can be up. And you can still turn to Him, even with the anxious feelings, and still experience His blessing. Because my wife and I know that the answer to this whole layoff thing was one of the greatest blessings of my life. In a job that I absolutely love for 7 months now, that is just unbelievable. And God fulfilled His promises. So a couple of things as we finish this off today. Do you become controlling when your anxiety rises? Is that an issue for you? For some of you, it's not you, it's the person you're sitting next to. That's okay, just let me do my job. Are you feeling anxious today? Some of you, again, you weren't, but now you are. Have you admitted it to yourself? Are you being honest about it? Are you making a list of the what ifs? Some of you, this is what you're doing. You're what-ifing yourself into more anxiety. What if it never changes? What if things get worse? What if? You're making yourself you are embedding the anxiety. And I'm asking you, if you're doing that, your anxiety will be growing. And I'm challenging you to think a different way. What proactive step can you take? And what proactive step can you take to run to God in the middle of this situation that's got you feeling so anxious? Maybe bow your heads. He just loves you beyond any words that I will ever possess that can help you understand just how much He values you. I will never, ever come close to describing how important you are to God. He loves you so much that He sent His only Son into this world to die for you. Not just so that you can be forgiven and die someday and go to be with Him in heaven, but so that you can live with Him now and you can have His help now. And it all begins by letting Him be your Father. Jesus is the key to that. If you want to step into a new relationship with God, you have to give your life to Him. And maybe some of you are ready for that decision today because you're just tired of what your effort can produce. You can say something like this in your heart to Him. Say, Jesus, I'm turning to You right now. I am far, far from perfect, and I know that, and I confess it to You. But Jesus, I heard You died on the cross for me. Please forgive me. Come make Your home inside of me today. Now, some of you, you're followers of Jesus, and you're really struggling with this subject today. You have a lot of anxiety. Maybe it's time to have a little conversation with God at the end of the service today. And it's just time to be honest with Him and say, God, I'm feeling really anxious today. Because there are situations in my life that feel out of control to me. And I don't like it. But You made all these promises to me. Promises that You are working on my behalf and for my good. So before what I can even see, I want to say thank You. I want to show You my faith, despite being in a situation that feels so out of control to me. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this service today. We hope as a church and pray that this was something that really helps connect you deeper to Jesus. That's what we're all about as a church. If you need to communicate with us, if you go online to penuelchurchlife.com, in the upper right-hand corner is a box that says, I said yes to Jesus. It also says, please pray for me. Just click on that, and it'll take you to a place where you can communicate with us as a church. So if you ever want any of the resources we mentioned in a service, go there and let us know. We'll gladly send them to you. Or if you made a decision to say yes to Jesus or you have a prayer request, just let us know. And we're always glad to hear from the people who are watching online. And if we can continue to help you grow in your faith in any way, then we want to do that. So again, thank you. And our prayer is that you continue to grow and connect and find the true life that Jesus Christ is offering.